So I'm screen sharing and I just want to there we go. Okay. So let's start with the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, and he has a quote that I wanted to start with because it applies to the times right now, that the discord and the pandemic. He said, all sentient beings, a sentient being is any living organism or person, all sentient beings have the seed of Buddha within them. I think that's lovely. So that's something we're trying to remember, to hope the seed of Buddha will keep everyone on a good path. All right, so it all started for Eileen and me with this book. The author has a few black marks, I guess, since he wrote the book, but I don't care because it's a wonderful book. The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And I had talked about, Eileen and I talked a bit about dying. She was losing her mother, and she knew that I was in hospice and wanted to help elderly people. And I said, I want to give you this surprise for your birthday. And it's about living and dying, but mostly about living. And it's one of my favorite books. And then.
So from reading the book, I got excited, and I was getting ready to retire, and I like to plan ahead. So I was thinking that I needed to have some place to go to step outside my normal culture so that I could deep think, if you will. And I'd always had a fascination, a daydream of, wouldn't it be interesting to stay in a Buddhist monastery? So I started Googling. I went to Tibet. I thought monastery in Tibet would be awesome, but found out quickly that you can't really go to a Buddhist monastery in Tibet because the Chinese have closed them all down. So Nepal was the nearby second choice, and I started looking around, and I found a place called Kopan Monastery, and that sounded nice, and the pictures looked gorgeous. And so I shared that with Pat, and we decided to travel together to the Buddhist monastery.
All right, so there we
are. There we are.
It's just like flying.
Over the Himalayas.
Yeah, we had to fly via Delhi, and flying that far is like flying to Los Angeles, back again in 2,000 more miles. So it's a long trip. But boy, when we got over the Himalayas, and Eileen was kind enough to let me have the window seat, so I have my nose on the window looking for Mount Everest, which one's the tallest. But there were just huge peaks covered with snow. It was absolutely stunning. We
landed. I'm sorry. Yeah. Did you have more to say about the Himalayas?
No.
Okay. No. So we landed, and we were quickly brought down to earth. As we, first of all, in the airport, we had to fill out visas there. It took us a couple of hours to clear the airport. Once we were on the other side, we needed some money, and we went up to the money changer, and they said, I'm sorry, but we're out of money for today. So we only had a few Indian pieces of money, and they had to last us for the first 10 days that we were there in the monastery. We were budget travelers at that point. But the big excitement was getting out into the street, where we had to hail a cab to take us to the monastery.
So the cab is bouncing along. Now, we're there at the end of monsoon season. And what that is so much rain that it just wipes out sections of the road and makes huge potholes. So we're bouncing, and the cab is going around people and around sacred cows and motorcycles, and bouncing around. And we're looking out and seeing a lot of little shops that are kind of like almost made of cardboard, just people's industry. It was really fascinating and very third world, and the route that we took. And we got to, and actually we each had a scarf with us that we had on the plane. And so we had to put the scarf, we put it over our whole head because there was so much dust flying in the cab. I don't think there were any windows in it. And dust was flying up our noses and in our eyes. But things started to calm down a little bit. And then?
Well, then there had been some trouble with the roads, creating havoc with the roadway. and we met our Waterloo on a hill where a piece of concrete had caved in, and the cab couldn't get over the extended hole. It tried valiantly several times, but in the end, no going. And so Pat and I disgorged ourselves from the cab. One of the men took her suitcase and put it on a high ledge. My suitcase was put on the ground into the mud. And so I picked up my suitcase and I started trudging up this hill, the top of which would be the monastery. And I looked back after a while and there was no Pat. So I turned around and retraced my steps and found that poor Pat hadn't been able to reach the ledge with her suitcase, and all of the men had disappeared. And so there she was stranded. So she finally regained a driver who moved her luggage, and together we started up this hill. Well, what do you know? Along came this van full of children, and the van stopped and said, "Would you like to have a ride up the hill?" And we said, "Yes, thank you." So the car was full already. And so I sat in the front seat with a child on my lap, and Pat was in the middle back, and she looked like a U because her feet and her head were touching the ceiling, and her bottom was on the bottom. Anyway, they took us up and we arrived at the gates and walked through, and it was such a different experience.
Things got so calm and beautiful and slow and perfect. And around, we go in the gate, and around the corner to the right, there's a welcome office. And we have to take a deep breath because the monks are handling things beautifully and at a comfortable pace. They tell us that we need to hand over our cell phones and that they would keep our money for us. And they put everything into a beautiful silk bag and put it back in the locked room. They gave us a charge card to fill out to pay for our entire stay and all our meals for 10 days for $180. And they assigned the rooms to us. I'm sorry, Eileen.
No, go ahead.
They assigned rooms to us. We each had a private room with a private bath. The rooms are very, as you can see, very bare, simple with a desk. And the bathroom was, my bathroom was so interesting. It had a sink and a john. And when I could sit at the john, I could shower at the same time because I could reach over and get the wand and shower myself off. So it was a tiny little john. But you know, having that shower wand was very helpful because here we went barefoot all the time, except when we were outside of all the rooms. When we were inside anywhere, we had shoes that we could kick off easily, thank goodness, and keep barefoot in the rooms.
So when we left the office, a porter, helped us take our luggage down the pathway to where our rooms were. And along that path, there was a tree, and it was inhabited by monkeys. And they were not very friendly monkeys. They kind of at us as we went by. So we were on guard for the monkeys from then on. But the porter was interesting because he, in subsequent conversations, we found out that he subsisted solely on the tips that we, the visitors, gave to him. He had 6 children in a rural village some distance away. And because of the monies, he was only able to visit them once a month. I thought that was a sad story, but it's certainly indicative of the poverty that is rampant throughout this country. So we had on the wall as we came out of the office, there is this piece of direction. And it says, "Please refrain from killing, stealing, lying, sexual conduct, and intoxicants, including tobacco." So for 4 of those, I didn't have any plans, but killing, I hadn't come to practice any killing, so I was confused. But it turns out that killing meant killing any living creature, including the bugs. So from then on, when the spiders came out in the room, I would scoop them up and send them out the window with a little prayer.
Yeah, we always saw people walking out of their rooms maybe with a spider on a leaf or a beetle on a leaf and putting it lovingly back on the bush. Along the way between, in the middle of the monastery, there were prayer wheels that we would spin along the way, pick a prayer to remember. And there were also plaques on the wall with some of the Buddhist thoughts, and very powerful, very inspiring. I'm going to move right on.
So the monastery was full of gorgeous scenery. Right before you is what they call a stupa, and there were two stupas in the garden on this monastery. One of them was very large, and the other one was humongous, and it was about the size of what you're looking at here. These gardens were full of pathways where you could do walking meditations. There were fountains, there were little gazebos where you could have private discussions. And in the evening, the flowering trees that were in our garden were lit up, and flashing reds, pinks and whites and blues covered the garden in this just gorgeous evening setting. And from the garden, you could see down below, as you can see here, you could view all of Kathmandu from all sides. It was gorgeous.
One of the best things was just meandering in the gardens in the morning before we have tea and after every meal, just strolling and meditating. Lots of paths around the gardens. There were also people still working to continue to build up the residential area of the monastery. Mostly there were ladies carrying with bags on their backs, carrying the loads up the hill.
There had been a terrible earthquake in 2016, and so some of the buildings on the monastery grounds had collapsed, and there was serious construction going on while we were there. Oh, look at those darling boys.
So how do boys get to be monks and girls get to be nuns? There's also a nunnery. The boys that are there are supposed to mostly come in when they're 9 years old now, and they have to be healthy. They might be orphans. They have to apply. They have to be ready to be good students, and they work very hard. They and their younger ones, older ones, there they are in the Gompa. The Gompa is the big, incredible, it's almost like a cathedral, but it's just a beautiful study structure. And sometimes the older monks argue. I don't have a good picture of it, but they have debates. They have philosophical debates. And that's so perfect because we thought there was a lot of philosophy to consider when we started to study Buddhism. And here are the darling young ones. And we'll tell you about the white scarves that they're holding. And Eileen will tell you about, she'll tell you about the special little Lama.
Yes, as Pat said, the boys that we saw were typically around ages 9, but there was one little boy. He was about 4 years old at the time, and he was always accompanied by an adult monk. And we came to learn the story of this little boy. So the monastery's leader had died. He was the Lama of the monastery. And when a Lama dies, there is a search for the new Lama, because it is said that he will reincarnate, and the search committee just has to find him. So they spread out across the villages in Nepal, And it took them quite a time. It took them almost 2 years. And they came across this little fellow, and they were doing a lot of interviews, of course. And the way they interviewed was that they had a collection of the materials and objects that had belonged to the prior Lama. And this little boy was the only one who could correctly identify all of the objects. And they said, "Little boy, you are the new Lama." And he said, "How propitious." I just love that story. And so he began life in the monastery. Little lamas are assigned to an adult who will be their mother, father, teacher, mentor, and friend until they have grown. And so we saw him at the beginning of his journey.
That's a fascinating story. Would you all like to answer? Don Greenwood has a question. Did you have any problems with language communication? It sounds like a lot of locals understood and spoke English.
Well, that's an interesting question. The answer is we didn't have any language problems. The teachers that we had there all spoke English. We had one monk who had a heavy accent, so sometimes it was hard to understand him. But the interesting thing is that our teachers weren't Nepali. We had a Swedish nun whose English and accent were excellent. And we had we had two Australian nuns. And so these classes were specifically for English-speaking people. So there was never a language problem at our visit.
You know, and I was in the little library once, and the man in charge of the library said, "I'm studying English. Can you help me with these? Tell me what these words are." So everyone who's there is studying English. And I thought it would be nice to go there and be an English teacher, because everyone is studying English. Yeah. I'm probably studying other languages as well. This is the door to the Gompa. And on both sides there are racks where you could put your shoes so that you enter barefoot into the Gompa.
And what a gorgeous surprise when those doors opened. Is that not a stunner? In the middle is the golden Buddha, and he is flanked on either side by other manifestations of Buddha. One of them, which isn't obvious in this picture, but he's blue. His name is Chenrezig, and he is the Buddha of medicine. And in the corner, there up front on the right side, there was a chair, and there was a monk sitting there, very placidly, didn't move a muscle, and we wondered who he was. Well, it turns out that he was an effigy. He was an effigy of the Lama who had died, and he was so respected that they wanted to continue his presence, and they made a sculpture that was very lifelike, and he sits there in perpetuity. So one of the things about the philosophy of Buddhism is a search for enlightenment, and our journey is our karma. So if we say to ourselves, well, I'm not really like my parents, the Buddhists would say, well, that's because you've come from other precious lives. So our discussions involved questions like, what is enlightenment? How do we achieve it? How do we deal with a mean person? We would have discussion groups in the afternoon. And one of the things that we discussed there were the three levels of lower being, the three lower levels of being. There are 6 levels in all in Buddhist teaching. And the 3 lower ones are ones you don't want to go to. The animals, the ghosts, and the devils. The monks take vows, and some of them involve practicing kindness and compassion to all living things. And there's the story of the fleas. Did you want to tell that story, Pat?
Well, first of all, yeah, I think we'll get to that, but I wanted to talk about some of the very early learnings that we had in the Gompa from Annie Karin, who was our Swedish nun. There was just one concept that really grabbed me, and I said, "Oh, Pat, you need to know this so badly and practice it." And this was the theory of attachment. What is the difference between love and attachment? I think, oh, I love somebody, that's the most I can do. But sometimes with that love, I attach, and then I have expectations. And what I learned was how much of our discomfort, our anger, our frustration, our discouragement, are all attached to, are all because we have attachment to somebody, to something, to some outcome, to something that I'm expecting to happen. Think about that. To me, that was the most important lesson and it was a very early lesson, and it rang throughout everything that we studied in the Gompa. Let's see, where should we go with this?
Well, I wanted to riff off of you and say that in one of our discussion groups, somebody, so let me just say that the people that we were with came from all over the world. And so we had worldviews coming together and sharing information that the rest of us didn't know. And there was a man there from Croatia who now lives in Prague. And he was telling us that he had heard that Jesus, as a young man, had gone off and traveled as far as Kashmir. You know, in the studies that we have on Jesus, we know that he was a carpenter's son, but there is that gap of about 12 years. We don't meet him until he's age 30. And what was he doing all that time? Was he just a carpenter back in Nazareth, or was he in Kashmir? And I thought that was an interesting story, because a lot of what Christianity proffers has some commonalities with Buddhism. And so I asked the nun who was our teacher, the Swedish nun, later, I said, "Did you ever hear the story about Jesus going to Kashmir?" And she said, "Oh, sure, everybody knows that one." So, different world.
Yeah, well, here's a picture, really a typical student group for the Intro to Buddhism course that we did. So we were definitely on the older side, but when we came back and did our second course on death and dying, we had a group, instead of 100, it was more about 25 people, and they were more in the older age group. We have some funny stories that the monks told about how caring for all sentient beings can be taken to the extreme. Go ahead, Eileen.
Well, you want me to tell the story about the fleas?
Talk about the fleas,
Okay.
and I'll talk about the goats. How's that?
So one of these monks decided that he was going to be the savior of the fleas. And he would collect them off his back, and he would put them in a sock to warm them up. And unfortunately, he left the sock on the floor, and the maid came through and put it through the washing machine. So there went the fleas. But there were other animals to talk about. Pat, you want to talk about the goats?
The goats, yeah. There was a monk that would go to market and buy the goats that were for sale and take them home and take care of them. We have a picture later on about the sanctuary that Copan has for animals. But anyway, he would take them home, and he would put prayer beads on them, and he would surround them with all the flowers that they could eat. So he wanted to let them finish their natural lives. There was another monk who would buy crayfish at the market and take them back to the water and let them go. So we did some wonderful meditations. Let's see if I can get a picture of Ani Karen. This is a woman. The nuns all shave their heads. They talk about the balance, equal balance of the masculine and the feminine. And she's a lovely lady with beautiful singing voice as well. And she led us, she did the initial teachings on meditation. And I know a lot of the people on the call today have experienced meditating, so we won't go into that much. But the way that we were taught in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition was to put the right hand inside the left, the right hand symbolizing compassion and the left hand symbolizing wisdom. She would ask us to breathe in patience, compassion, and wisdom, and exhale anger and distraction. Should we do that once? Let's just do it. You can close your eyes if you like. Right hand, compassion, inside of the left, wisdom. Just breathe in patience, compassion, wisdom. Exhale anger and distraction. And distraction is a big one in meditating, so we definitely worked on that. And then at the end of the day, she would lead us in some chants. And because Eileen is a trained musician, and because trying to sing online at all different warp speeds doesn't work very well, I asked her if she would replicate one of the chants that we did so beautifully and movingly at Kopan.
So I'd like to set the scene for this. It was evening, and the evening shadows had been cast across the Gompa as we sat on our mats. And there was a special glow to the air. And the nun introduced us to the chant. And the chant was meant to express these feelings. From your heart, we ask the Buddha for inspiration to follow the path to full enlightenment. We make this request on behalf of all living beings who are trapped in samsara. Imagine that they all receive such inspiration and blessings as we recite the name mantra of Shakyamuni Buddha as many times as possible. So this chant began and continued for about 10 to 15 minutes. And it was a soft chant that built in power through the repetitions. I'm going to try and teach you the melody, and we're going to put the words up on the screen. And I'm going to invite you to mute yourselves. And when you're comfortable, join me in singing this chant. So here is the chant. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Soha. Join me. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Soha. One more time. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Soha. It was dark when we finished that chant, and it was a beautiful moment. Music for me puts me in a space that's inexpressible, and that was just a wonderful experience. So,
Thank
Pat,
you,
tell us
Eileen.
what life in the monastery is like.
Well, we had a routine. We got up early. What time was it? 6:45?
6 o'clock. The gong rang at 6.
Okay. We all had little duties we could volunteer for. One was getting up earlier, maybe 5, and going around to all the residential buildings and ringing the gong to wake up everybody else. And that was a nice way. I didn't do that, but that was a nice way to wake up to the gong. And then we would have a morning tea. And then we would we would have a lesson, then we would have a lunch, then we would have a break, and then a lesson, and then we would have dinner. So there was always time. It was relaxing, but we were very busy. We were learning, and then we were digesting a lot of what we were learning. I took us all the way to the dining room. You want to say anything before we talk about the food?
Well, we were, it was a large dining hall, kind of the typical cafeteria look. It was a modern building, but it had this fabulous porch attached to it that could seat about 50 of us, long tables. And the porch was always where I headed because the views were spectacular. You could look out and see the mountains in the distance. You could see another beautiful Nepali, I think it was a Buddhist building, a quite ornate one. And you could look down and see the steep path leading up to the monastery that was usually populated by workmen coming up. The people who worked there would be coming and going, and there was a farm nearby, and you could see the people who lived in the simple house coming out and working with their animals. And it was holiday time, and so there were kites flying. If you've ever read the story The Kite Runner, it resembled that. Nepal has the similar tradition as Afghanistan, and the kites were gorgeous and just jumped around in the morning air. It was a beautiful sight.
We come to the dining room. I have my bag that I can carry my textbooks in, and my notebook that I kept notes in. I filled a whole notebook. And I also had a very important, this is another scarf, a bandana. And I actually could have used about 3, because thank you to Professor Lori Leave, who's a friend of ours and teaches Buddhism and spent a lot of time in Nepal. She said, Pat, the one thing that I really recommend in order to keep yourself healthy while you're there is to bring something to, when you go through the line at the dining room, that you bring something to dry off the plates with. And she said, even if I go to eat at someone's home, and she usually stays with people, or if I go to a restaurant, I always ask them to make sure the plates and the glasses are dry, because the water, just a drop of water, can carry some bacteria that can really upset your intestinal system. So I thought that was great. We had for breakfast a kind of porridge, like kind of a soupy oatmeal that was good, and you could put as much sugar on it as you wanted. And we had our tea, and we had our milk tea. We liked that so much that we got the recipe from them and put that in our book. We had always bread for every meal. And then for lunch, and this is what you're looking at, big plates of lunch of vegetables made various ways, some curried, some in fried dough that were really, really good, and rice usually, sometimes some pasta with it. And so as much as you wanted to eat, and again, the bread. And then we'd have afternoon tea, and then for dinner, we'd have soup and more bread. And Eileen had found that if she got a craving for a sweet tooth, she could go to, there was a little side restaurant within Kopan where you could order another kind of meal if you wanted. If you wanted bacon and eggs for breakfast, you could go in there and get it instead if you were craving something. But they also had some chocolate bars and some other alternatives for people that didn't want to keep living on the monastery food. But I thought it was the lunches were really, really delicious. I thought anyone who liked to eat well should have done very well with lunch. Let's see. The other duty that I told you about, the duty for lunch, the duty for ringing the gong if you wanted, but you could also sign up to help wash the dishes. And the kitchen was the most laughing place you've ever been. The ladies that worked there, the Nepalese ladies, were having such a good time just doing their work of cleaning the dishes. And so we would go out there and help them, and it was really fun. I didn't mention an alternative to tea. There was plenty of water to drink. In fact, I wanted to make sure that we always kept kept our own thermos of water full. So we would go out to near the kitchen, and there were big tubs of water that had been boiled. And so we could drink that water and not worry about it. So we would fill our thermoses every day and keep some in our room, and that would be the water that we would drink.
So after lunch, usually we had the discussion time and some free time. But on one occasion, they invited us to come over to a building that was a kind of Buddhist museum. And they gave us a tour. In it were objects and pieces of clothing and even some body parts. I think I remember some eyeballs of famous lamas from the past. And after we had toured that, they invited us to do a special kind of meditation, which was a walking meditation. And so the pathway that joined the residences to the first level office was a fairly long one, and we were walking up and down for about 30 minutes. And we were invited to imagine ourselves in some other situation in order to give us a heightened sense of compassion. I decided to imagine myself in a Syrian refugee camp. I've always had a particular sensitivity to that horrible condition that those people are in. And I think it was magnified because one of the monks who was on the property with us was an Australian man, obviously, who came from a well-to-do family who had embraced Buddhism, and he had just returned from the Syrian camps. So that gave me extra impetus to imagine myself in those horrors. When one does that kind of a meditation, it cannot help but produce in one a growing sense of feeling yourself a part of humanity and sharing the vicissitudes as well as the joys.
Yeah, there was another meditation that struck me deeply too, and Suzanne, you might have done this before. This is doing a meditation where you're passing a beggar, homeless person on the road, and one slow step at a time, I won't take you through it, you end up trading places. It's very, very powerful. I'm choked up just remembering it now. We're going to talk about the second course. We actually took a break because the two courses weren't consecutive. We actually took a break and went to India in between because on the map, see this little bit, see India and Nepal are right next to each other, and Varanasi, the city I really wanted to see, seemed like on the map it was only this far away from Kathmandu. But we'll talk about India another time. So the second course when we came back was on death and dying, and it's the course, one of the books is going how to help someone go happily into the next life. And this was a course that was shorter, and let me see, the teacher was the Australian nun that Eileen mentioned, and we called her Ani Wongmo. Her real name is Rubina Curtin, and there are lots and lots of her YouTube videos online. You can look at, if you just Google Rubina Curtin. She was a doozy. She was really demanded attention, was very strong, not the typical retiring nun that you'd expect. She was very strong, and she made no bones about it. She said, yeah, tell it like it is, and she did. And you'll see that when you watch her videos. So there we were in the Gompa again, on our cushions or on a chair. See some people in your foreground sitting on chairs, so that was also available, and doing classes on death and dying with Ani Wongmo.
So I'm going to give you a shortened version of the lessons on death and dying according to Buddhist tradition. I found this absolutely fascinating. And the reason, one of the reasons, was that the Tibetan tradition has made it a singular focus of their studies on the way people pass out of existence and presumably re-enter according to Buddhist tradition. So here's the way dying happens in stages. The first 4 of the 8 stages have the body losing capacities in the physical realm. So the earth loses power and the body becomes heavy. Sight fails and is replaced by mirages. And then water loosens, which affects the hearing. Fire disintegrates, and the dying person recognizes sparks. And finally, a wind comes along and it dissolves and breathing ceases. So that's the preliminary 4 stages. And then happens the interesting stuff. And what's coming, I will just share with you that Pat and I have a friend who is an Indian doctor here, and he was describing to me when he goes to a dying patient. There was a lady that he was sitting with, and he asked her if she was afraid of dying, and she said yes. And he said, don't be afraid. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to see a white light, and just follow that white light, and you'll be fine. He said, are you afraid now? And she said, no. So here's what the Buddhists have to say about the next 4 stages. The mind's clear vacuity is filled with that white light, followed by red, then a thick darkness, and finally an ultimate clear light to focus on. And people can remain in that state for hours or even days, which is an amazing thing. This limbo period is called bardo. It can last a few seconds or up to 49 days. One is then reborn, and the mind travels on and on and on.
I'm plugging in my computer.
Would you guys like to answer a few questions?
Oh, wait. I'm not finished. I had to plug in my computer. It said the battery's running low. I forgot to plug it in.
Oh, it was your battery. Okay, I was seeing the sign going, why am I having a battery issue?
Yeah, I think we all thought that.
One wonderful thing, excuse me, Steve, we're nearing the end, but one wonderful thing that we loved about Kopan was that the nuns and monks made themselves available if any of us wanted to kind of book a separate session with them. And I'd had some interesting spiritual experiences and dreams and so on that I wanted to talk about, and so it was very, very exciting for me. And some people had challenges in their lives that they wanted to deal with, and they would get the advice of the nuns and monks. So people came to Kopan for many different reasons, sometimes because they wanted to deal with something, and sometimes they were just curious, and so there were, and sometimes they were actual pilgrims in the spiritual world. So it was the death and dying. So I think Eileen wanted to talk about one more thing at the end.
Thank you. Actually, two, and this is a good lead off.
Okay.
You're in the bookshop right now. The bookshop in the library sat atop the office, and I would go there from time to time. And one day I was reading a book, and there was this most remarkable statement that I found in the book, and it referenced a man who is from Australia. His name is John Brown. He's an abbot in a Buddhist monastery there, but he had been at Cambridge. He worked in the same department of applied math and theoretical physics where Stephen Hawking had been. And he states that, he states with authority that rebirth is an established fact. I don't know, because I'm not that smart to have that kind of vision, but I thought it was fascinating that someone of that stature intellectually would say that. So the final things that I wanted to share with you about Nepal is that there's a holiday called Dashain, and it was happening while we were there. It's in Nepal, it's a Hindu festival of lights for 15 days. Nepal is actually Nepal is actually a Hindu festival, so this was their Christmas. It symbolizes the spiritual victory of good over evil and knowledge over ignorance. So when we were there, from the mountaintop, in the evenings especially, we would look out our windows down the mountain, and we could hear and see all of these sounds. There were parades going on, there were drums and masked dancers, and the notion was that special blessings would attach to the people who didn't sleep all night. And I said that the dogs were getting blessed because there were lots of mongrel dogs on the monastery compound, and they would set up baying without stop all night long. So I think that they were in the Buddhist tradition, or I guess the Hindu tradition. But on our leave taking of the monastery, we were subjected to an unhappy aspect of this holiday. Like Americans who gobble up turkey at Thanksgiving, the Nepalese have goat. And 30,000 goats are killed on any given holiday year. And as we traveled in our taxi down the streets, we could see the roads running red, and we had to redirect the cab driver to some side streets to avoid that horrible, horrible sight. So it was an interesting conclusion to a very interesting trip.
So as I said, well, this is Varanasi, India. We'll talk about that another time, and I'm going to stop the screen share if I can. And we can, Steve can move us to time to have a party together.
Yeah, and but while I'm doing that, let me address the questions that came in while you guys were talking. And oh boy, my screen now, I'm the one that's here it is. Okay, well, let's see. Nancy Mitchell has raised her hand. So Nancy, you have a question? And while we're waiting for her to talk, let's see. The Gompa looks cold. What was the temperature?
Warm. They would open the windows and we would catch the breeze at night, but it could be, you could feel like it was in the 80s. Outside it wasn't so bad, but the Gompa got a little close.
It was September, and it's a warm place of the world.
I think Nancy is on now. Nancy?
I just wanted to know how long your total trip was, including your trip to India.
1 month.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. And then while I'm going through these questions, if you guys want to join the visual travel party at the end, raise your hand and I'll go through these questions and then I'll advance everybody so that we can see each other. Let's see, Marion Ted Hart said photos, camera. Did you guys were you allowed to take pictures?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe that was a question early on. Okay, Don Greenwood says, were there other Americans and or people from other countries participating in what you experienced? Did you meet and discuss your experiences with others?
Oh my gosh, yes. The Americans were in a minority. For the first session, it was predominantly young people, including a lot of trekkers. I don't know if that's the right term, but a lot of people who were on the lam for years at a time, just traveling around. And they were an interesting sort. We had in our discussion group a Brit who was living in one of the Arabian states. We had the man from Croatia. We had a Belgian. Australians were there. South Americans were in evidence. I think we had an African. Pat, do you recall?
Yes, we did. Yes, and interesting. And people who had, and most of the people were, especially the young people, were just there traveling the world, wherever they came from. They might have come from the States, but they were living week to week, month to month, without a long range plan. They would stay in the monastery, and when things cooled off there, they'd buddy up with somebody else and they decide to go somewhere in Tibet or somewhere in China, and they just move and go all around India. They all came.
An Irish girl there who showed us, we went into Kathmandu one time, and she was going to stay at another hostel that was running about $5 a day.
A few more questions before we start. And again, if you want to be
I
in
think
the
Bert had a
little-
question. Let me get Bert Heacock.
Oh, Bert. Well,
You have a question?
yeah, let me read these three and then you guys can just have a chat.
All right.
Is there any, Don says, is there any philosophical significance to the type of food you were served at each meal?
Yeah, no animals.
Um,
That was
It was
it.
vegetarian cuisine.
Most everything came from the gardens.
have either of you read Lincoln or Bardo?
Yes,
That's Jeff and Mary.
yes. I read the first half. I couldn't follow it. But there is a book that I do recommend called The Little Princes, written by Connor Grennan. And it's the story of the orphans who are rampant across Kathmandu. The population of the capital swelled by at least 2 in the last decade because of the Maoist revolutions going on in the western province of Humla. And he traces the orphans and their lives in the city. And it's just a heartwarming as well as distressing, but ultimately a wonderful tale of life and transformation.
Yeah,
And
I think we usually put a lot of, in our book we listed, I'll have to look at it, we listed some other books. I have the book titles that were shared at Copan. The list is really long. I should go through and pull out everything because there were so many books that people said, oh, you have to read this, you have to read that. So yeah, I think I'll do that. I'll make that available.
great. And then the last one, and then we can do the travel party final chat is, do couples ever attend these classes?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Yeah, couples
Do
ever stay
couples-
there?
Do
Yes.
couples ever attend?
Couples, yes,
Yeah.
yes, but they're assigned to different houses.
And they're not, yeah, and they're not precluded from sexual relationships. There were actually, yay, Mary. There were actual dorms there had maybe 14 bunks in them that were a lot cheaper than what we paid. So you can actually stay without a private bath in a dorm bunks, and then there's a very nice bathroom with multiple showers and sinks that are private, at least have a shower curtain on them, that are down the hall. So all that is open, especially for these the youngest people, the college students, and those that just gotten out of college and off to see the world.
Great. Okay. Well, I got through all the questions there. If anybody wants to be added to the open chat, raise your hand and I'll bring you over, and have at it, guys.
Thank you for being with us. I'm waiting to talk to Bert as soon as we get on here. Are we transferred?
Yeah.
Okay. Bert, I told everyone about your daughter when we traveled last week to the Galapagos,
Uh-huh.
or 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
What was your daughter's position again?
Oh, she is a professor of evolutionary biology at the University of Buffalo. And she is obviously very interested in the Galapagos. And we were, prior to the COVID-19 crisis, we were working diligently on putting a trip together. I don't think it was actually going to happen this year anyway. Coordinating things with her schedule and her husband's schedule are very, very difficult. He's also a professor there, social psychology. And in the summer, he sometimes teaches in Singapore. So it's hard to get time to do these things.
That's I know you're going to go, and you know I've encouraged you. Did you have a comment about the Buddhist religion?
I just asked, it was actually a question that was already asked. I asked about the couples. We were in Thailand a number of years ago and spent a day with Buddhist monks at a Buddhist monastery. And I just think my wife might really enjoy this. She is, I don't know, because I can't get her to go to India because poverty really is not her thing. Let me tell you, really not her thing.
I told her on the cab ride over.
Yeah.
My husband wouldn't go because we were going to India, and he said, I definitely never want to go to India. We found it interesting, but he was right.
I'd rather go to Nepal than India any day.
Yeah, he was right about the pollution and the crowds and the traffic and all. But he would have liked the monastery very much, because he could live in his sweats. He could argue philosophy. He would have loved it.
Well, I think Terry would love it too. I'll have to talk to her. I've already ordered that book, so.
Okay.
I really, it's very meaningful right now.
Good.
Thank you.
It's going to be a while before anybody goes anyplace.
I know.
Well, we're vicariously going to have another trip next week. The Galapagos is a good jumping off point for me to share what's next. Close by, we're going over to Peru. And it's a trip that my husband and I and our youngest daughter, Caitlin, took about 13 years ago now. She had just finished her master's degree. She had been in constant schooling for years and deservedly needed a break. And she has always been a lover of animals. And so we thought that rather than taking the usual trip over to Europe, we would go south. And we wound up in Peru. And it's going to be an amazing adventure that I'm going to take you on. We're going to start with an earthquake. Then we're going into the Peruvian Amazon, and we're going to take a boat down the Amazon to a primitive set of camps, and we're going to visit shamans and walk on hanging bridges. There's a Smithsonian research station there. We're going to travel to an island devoted to orphaned monkeys. The Amazon is an amazing adventure. And then we're going back to Lima for a day, and then we're going on to the Urubamba Valley, which is the point of departure for heading up to Machu Picchu, the Inca enclave, which is its own dramatic story and full of visual, spectacular things. So I hope that you will join us next week because it's going to be quite the time. Are there other questions about tonight and the Buddhist monastery, Nepali traditions, anything?
Lori.
No.
Hi, Eileen and Pat.
Hi, Laura.
I accidentally found a Buddhist monastery in Sterling, here in Sterling, when I got lost trying to find Belfort furniture. So if you if you want to continue your Buddhist studies, there is a monastery here in Sterling, Virginia.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
I wonder what kind of Buddhism it is. You know, it's like the Christian religions. There are all sorts of variants. So we'll have to investigate that. Thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, good thought.
Nancy? No? Okay. Well, great.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, there's Mary.
Oh, hi.
Mary.
Happy birthday, Jeff.
Mary, if you want to be heard, you need to unmute.
We're trying. There we go.
There you go.
Thank Eileen. Okay, we're
Happy
trying.
birthday.
Yeah,
Thank
happy
you.
birthday, boy. Jeffrey Dunbar.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a practical question. I just can't believe it cost you $180, did you say?
Yes.
How many weeks?
Oh, that was for about 10 days.
That was the first 10 days.
The first 10 days. And did that include the food?
Everything.
Wow.
I'm telling you, it was a deal.
That was the deal. Wow. Isn't
Yeah.
that something?
We'd
I'd like to
try to pay more and support the monastery.
It's
Wow.
really
nice.
inexpensive to travel through Nepal. Like I said, the Irish lady had a beautiful room down in the city for $5 a night.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, can you hear me?
Well, it's
This is Judy Keithley talking.
Yeah, hi.
Yes.
Hi. So, I want to tell you just briefly about another kind of Tibetan monk monastery that my husband and I went to a long time before you went to yours. It was, and I'm so jealous of the food you got because we basically ate dalbat for 3 days and 3 nights straight.
I
Maybe
forgot to mention dalbat, but that was just one choice. We didn't have to live on it.
we had no choices.
What is Galbat?
Anyway, we
It is basically a lentil
Lentil
Tasty.
puree.
stew with rice and other
Oh.
vegetables thrown in.
Okay.
But in its worst form, in its worst form, it's just a yellow goo put over rice. Anyway, we traveled around the world in 1968 and 69 and ended up in Sikkim. Well, we went to Kathmandu intending to hike, but it turned out we had picked up amoebic dysentery in Indonesia, and we were pretty sick when we were there.
Oh.
We didn't have any energy, let's put it that way, to go try and hike. So we ended up, we somehow got forged papers to be able to get into Sikkim, which was really cool because Indians and nobody could go in there at that time. But there was the Panchen Lama had a monastery there, who I think is third in line. And so we had heard that you could ask permission to go and visit the monastery. And so we did, and we went and we stayed for 3 days, and there was an Indian man there. So he spoke English and was able to tell us certain things, but we didn't get any schooling. We didn't get anything. We were just kind of allowed free rein to wander around. It was much more, I wouldn't say it's primitive because the temples itself was just beautiful. The monastery, there were no women there, but there were certainly the boys, monks all over in their little robes. What I remember is the long Tibetan horns. Did you see any of these horns that are about long that curve? And they would blow them at the beginning of prayers and at the end of prayers at different times, and they were just haunting. And they also had things like butter sculptures, which were really intricate. They'd had carved like temples and monastery, like buildings and stuff out of that. And it was so cold up there that they just, it was fine. They didn't have to refrigerate them or anything.
Huh.
But it was a really interesting experience. And we actually got an audience with the Panchen Lama, and then we were so cowed by sitting in front of a living God that we could hardly wait to get out, because he wanted to know, ask questions, but I mean, there was nobody to translate. It was somebody was kind of translating, but not enough. And then they invited us for tea, and we thought, oh no, we shouldn't take up any time. And it wasn't until afterward we realized that was like really rude. We were 23 at the time. Anyway, it's a very different experience, and I'd love to go back and do what you did. I think that would be fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah, Copan was beautiful, and in terms of accommodation, perfectly fine. It wasn't, the rooms, of course, were basic, but they were clean and serviceable. The food was at least a little bit varied, and the company was great, and the gardens were gorgeous.
Yeah.
And the Gompa.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, the inside of the main temple was beautiful too. It had pictures of all the monks up at, all lined up and chanting, which was really nice. But when you talked about the monkeys in Kathmandu, we had this terrifying thing. We went up on the hill where that big stupa was, and we thought we were going to have a picnic lunch, and we got encircled by monkeys.
I know.
And my husband was like throwing stones to just try and push them back, not at them, but just trying to get them away. And they'd all run away, and then they'd come back, and they'd come back like a foot and a half closer each time, until finally we had to grab all our stuff.
I think we'll hear about it.
Oh dear.
Yeah, but we had them in the Peruvian jungle too, and also in Africa. Monkeys.
I can't wait to hear your talk next week. I loved reading about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I guess it's time to say goodbye. But
Joanne had her hand up.
All thank you.
Eileen, just a minute.
You had mentioned in your promo something about a murder. Is that when you were talking about the goats?
No, the murder is a story I didn't share with you, but here goes. So in 2001, Nepal has a royal family, and the Crown Prince, who was 21 at the time, was very mad that his father would not allow him to marry the woman that he loved. And so while the family was at a state dinner, he went in and murdered them.
Oh.
And being the Crown Prince, Nepalis are really big on tradition. So he had been mortally wounded in the fray and lay in a coma for 3 days, during which time the Nepalese named him king. If you can believe it. And of course he died, and so his uncle was then made
King for a day.
Yeah, very late. The uncle became king, and he was a raving autocrat apparently, and immediately was not happily received by the populace, especially the Maoists, and they had a stronghold over in the western province of Humla, and they began a series of counterinsurgencies, which led to all of these orphans being shunted off into Kathmandu by evil men who promised the families that they would educate the kids, and instead they were basically put into a slave type situation. And the population doubled as a result. So Kathmandu swelled dramatically within the last score of years, many of them orphans. And there are people out there trying to rescue these, and Copan is one of them, bringing these orphans up to the monastery for an education.
We had a man in our class who had been working at one of the orphanages and was so disgusted because the owners were taking the money that was donated, using it for themselves, and the children were starving. It was
right. So, and I meant to show off, this is a prayer shawl that I bought, and Pat has one too. And so I'm wearing it tonight in memory of my lovely Nepal.
the kata is actually something you buy and you give to your teacher at the end of the class.
That's right. It was blessed.
We had
This is a holy scarf.
Yeah, we'd go up and we'd present the scarf like this to the teacher, and the teacher would take it then and put it around our shoulders. So it's like a little graduation ceremony. But there's a lot. I make it sound like simple, but it's really very, very profound and very meaningful.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been wonderful. Nice to see you all. Thank you for coming. I hope to see you all next week for our trip to Peru. And I wish you all a good week.
Have a beautiful weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Bye.
everybody.
Namaste.
Thank you. Bye.
Namaste.